Welcome to the Silicon Valley Health Institute. We are a nonprofit 501c organization and would love any donations or membership to continue so we can continue this. We have switched from our monthly meetings, which were in person, to weekly Zoom meetings because we want to get information out there so we can all be proactive in our health. In the last week, we had some disappointing news. One of our videos was censored by the censor police on YouTube because it discussed vitamins and how to build up your resilience and how we could cope with various viruses, specifically COVID. So we'll keep trying. And today, we're very lucky to have Dr. Tom O'Brien. He is and my co-host here is Steve Fowkes. Brilliant man. I mean, I worship his brilliance. But anyway, about Tom O'Brien, Dr. Tom O'Brien is an internationally recognized speaker and writer on diseases and, on diseases and metabolic disorders. He is considered the world expert on the impact of wheat sensitivity and autoimmunity. In 2013, he organized the Gluten Summit. That was the first internet gathering of more than 25 experts in a particular health field. This has been followed by many, and we get so much information. It was a great start to a wonderful phenomenon. Dr. O'Brien has more than 30 years experience as a functional medicine practitioner and is a member of the teaching faculty at the Institute for Functional Medicine. He's the author of The Autoimmune Fix, and there's another book, at least one or two books since then. And more information can be found on his website, www.thedoctor, that's THEDR.com. Welcome, Tom. We are so lucky to have you.
Thank you so very much. It's a true pleasure to be with you. You guys are the cream of the crop, and I know that you implement what you learn, and it's a privilege, really privilege to speak with you. And I see some of my old friends in the audience here. It's really nice to see you, and thank you so much for being here. I knew that I was speaking to a more sophisticated audience today, and so I'm not going to do much of the basics. I'm told that we've got up to a couple of hours here, if I'm correct. All right, so I've got about 80 slides. It'll take me 45 to 50 minutes to do these slides of some of the basics that I know that you have some exposure to, but I don't know to what degree. So I want to make sure that we have these basics covered so then we can do a deep dive into your questions. I just completed Monday evening, a couple of days ago, a 4-week series by registration only, where every week I did a deep dive into 4 topics. The first one was detoxification. And I would just say that when you learn about this in detail, everyone needs to be having detoxification as primary in their health objectives on an ongoing basis, not once a quarter or once or twice a year, but every single day. But we did a deep dive there, and then immunity and how to enhance your immune function and why is it being drained, and then inflammation, and then the gut-brain connection. And so my goal was every one of those attendees has the big picture and implementation strategies with what I know to be current cutting edge to deal with each of those topics. And that's available for everyone at thedoctor.com/base hits. I call it the base hits. So these are the base hits that I think we all need to implement. And it was, let's see, Monday night was 3 hours with 4 slides, but 2 hours and 50 minutes of really profound questions, and everyone learned from the questions. So I'd like to get up to speed on what I consider the basics here, and then we're going to go into your questions and answers, and for as much time as we have. So I'm going to share my screen to begin with. And I would suggest, if you wish, you're welcome to type questions into the chat, or you can write them down on your own and just ask them once we get started with the Q&A. Okay, so let me make sure. Can you see my screen okay? Okay, good, thank you. Okay, here we go. Let's make sure this is working properly. There we go, and there we go. Okay, so what is the spectrum of autoimmunity? I think we all know this, but just to make sure, in case there are some newcomers here, a way of understanding, first off, your immune system, autoimmunity is not a mistake. That your immune system is the system of the body that's your armed forces, and it's there to protect you. And the question is, what's it trying to protect you from? And as you begin to understand this, and I'll have first 15, 20 slides on this, I think, then you start asking questions about your own life and what is it that my immune system's protecting me from? So it was Melissa Arbuckle in 2003 that published a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine that changed the way that we think. And she went to the VA and looked for people with lupus. And in this one VA center, she found, I think it was 132 people with lupus. And if they were in a VA center, they're veterans. If they're veterans, they were in the armed forces. If they were in the armed forces, they'd had their blood taken many times over the years when they were healthy in the Navy or the Air Force or the Marines. And what most people don't know is that the government's been saving and freezing all of that blood since 1978, practically all of it. They've got tens of millions of samples of our service people's blood. Dr. Arbuckle knew this, and she asked for permission to look at the blood of the currently diagnosed lupus patients when they were healthy in the Navy. And she got permission, and what did she find? She found that every single patient with lupus had elevated antibodies years before the diagnosis, years. And the appearance of these elevated levels of antibodies tend to follow a predictable course with a progressive accumulation before there were any symptoms. The antibodies are elevated. So first, why do we ever have antibodies to our own tissue? I'll give you the example of the thyroid. And this is true for, as far as I know, every tissue in your body except your teeth. That Mrs. Patient, we have an entire new body every 7 years. Every cell in your body regenerates, every single cell. And some are very quick, some are very slow, but every cell regenerates. How does that happen? Your immune system makes antibodies to get rid of the old and damaged cells. So there's room for new cells to be made. And when you do a blood test for antibodies to your thyroid, as long as you're within the range of antibodies to your thyroid that is consistent with the number of new thyroid cells you're making, you're in the range. You're wiping out as many cells as you're making. When you have elevated levels of antibodies, that means you're outside the range. You're killing off more cells than you're making. And so that's a deficit. And you can't feel when you've got elevated antibodies to your thyroid. You can't feel elevated antibodies to myelin or to other brain tissue or to your joints or to your skin. You can't feel any of that. And Dr. Arbuckle really helped us understand these principles because she found that all 7 of the antibodies in lupus elevate in a predictable course over the years. Now, the midline for A is when people were diagnosed, but you can see 5 years beforehand, every single antibody was above 0 would be the reference range. So these are all elevated antibodies, 20%, 40%, 60, 80% above the reference range. And every antibody was elevated. Some of these antibodies were elevated 9 years beforehand, killing off more cells than you're making. And so you get the symptomatology, and within 6 months to a year, you then get the diagnosis, usually. With lupus, it's somewhere between 6 months and 2 years of suffering before you get the right diagnosis. But the point is these antibodies are elevated years before you ever know it. Now, a little bit of a segue, but relevant, is that the Alzheimer's Association told us last year that 1 out of 3 elders dies with Alzheimer's or another dementia. 1 out of 3. That's just an unacceptable but terrifying statistic. And we know that Alzheimer's is a decades-long process, that this is going on for years before you ever have a symptom. And if someone asks the question for some of the testing, identifying these mechanisms of brain inflammation before you have symptoms during the Q&A, we'll go into that. But the point here is years before symptoms. And she drew this summary graph of it. And she drew this one. Now notice that she put genetics influence whether you develop an autoimmune disease, and the environment influences whether you develop an autoimmune disease. This was 2003. So you have normal immunity. That's a normal level of antibodies to your thyroid or any other tissue. Benign autoimmunity means they're elevated, but there are no symptoms. Pathogenic autoimmunity means they're elevated, you're losing a lot more cells than you're making, and you're starting to get some symptoms. And then the clinical illness is when you get the diagnosis. So this prodromal period is the period where we all would like to address this mechanism if it's going on within us, whether it's to our thyroid or to our brain or to our joints. This prodromal period before there's so much tissue killed off that you get the diagnosis, you're really suffering. A prodromal period is an early symptom or set of symptoms that might indicate the start of a disease before specific symptoms occur. And in this case, it's elevated antibodies is what you would identify in a prodromal period. So the prodromal period is before symptoms, before the diagnosis. And this was game changing. This was paradigm shifting back in 2003 to really understand this. Oh, let me back up one. Individuals at risk to developing an autoimmune disease should be advised to refrain from activities and lifestyle which endangers their health and quality of life. That makes sense. So the question is, are you at risk of developing an autoimmune disease? Because if you have elevated antibodies for lupus, that's SLE, systemic lupus erythematosus, those are the 7 antibodies. And if any of them are elevated, the positive predictive value is 94 to 100%. You're getting lupus within 7 to 10 years. Scleroderma, either of those 2 antibodies, it's 100% in 11 years. Rheumatoid, either of those antibodies, 52 to 97% within 14 years. And you can see as we go down, primary antiphospholipid syndrome, especially the 3rd antibody in that syndrome, beta-2 glycoprotein 1, that is the antibody in unexplained miscarriages that's often there. And if you have elevated beta-2 glycoprotein 1, it's 100% within 11 years, you're getting primary antiphospholipid syndrome. So every woman of childbearing age who has a family history of unexplained miscarriages should test for this antibody. If it's elevated, you've got a problem. And we need to address this. And there are a few papers, you can just Google beta-2 glycoprotein 1 antibodies or unexplained miscarriages and gluten. And you can see the papers that talk about wheat-related disorders being the trigger for beta-2 glycoprotein 1, and that's one of the mechanisms by which unexplained miscarriages can occur. Either of the antibodies for thyroid, 92% PPV, within 7 to 10 years, you're getting Hashimoto's. And as we go down the list, and you see it's celiac, it's 50 to 60%, but if you also carry the celiac genes, it's 100% within 7 years. You're getting celiac. So this concept of predictive autoimmunity was developed. as a result of this, meaning let's look for these antibodies beforehand. And this test came out in 2010 that looked at 24 different antibodies to your own tissue. It's a blood test. It's from the lab Cyrex Labs. It's their array number 5. The first 4 are to the GI tract, 2 for the thyroid, then the adrenals, 4 for the heart and cardiovascular system, your reproductive system, your joints and tissue, bone, liver, pancreas, diabetes, antibodies, and the bottom 6 all are associated with the brain. This changed the game for most practitioners, being able to identify these mechanisms for tens of thousands of patients before they ever developed symptoms. I did this test back in 1997 when it was research only, so 13 years before Cyrex was formed. And I did this I did a panel like this on 316 consecutive patients, because I did this test and it came back and said I had elevated antibodies to cerebellum, angiogangliosides, and myelin basic protein. Now, myelin basic protein, that's MS. That's the mechanism of MS. Angiogangliosides is a mechanism for your entire brain shrinking on you and causing non-Alzheimer's dementias. And cerebellar antibodies causes your cerebellum to shrink. This is why seniors cannot dance up and down the stairs, because they don't have good balance anymore. And it's not their muscles, rather, but it's the proprioception from the brain, from the cerebellum and the brain, going down to those muscles to tell the body how to shift their weight. As your cerebellum atrophies, you lose that sense of grace. You lose that sense of walking. For all seniors, and I would suspect a number of the attendees here today are in that category, a slack line, SLACK, is extremely valuable over the course of a year to demand your proprioception to work better. It's like working a bicep muscle with a weight. You know, eventually you get good biceps. When you learn how to walk on a slack line, what's a slack line? It's about this wide, and you stretch it between 2 posts or 2 trees, and you just do it this far off the ground, and you stand on the line, and you walk on the line. And you could have a broomstick to keep your balance, you know, and you're just practicing getting your balance on the line, and you're gonna fall off, but you're only this far off the ground. You know, you're safe, and you start working a slack line. So if you've got cerebellar antibodies, that's part of the protocol we use for our patients to work that muscle, if you will, work that part of their brain. It's a valuable test. And there are other labs now that have more comprehensive tests than this, but this was the grandfather of those tests. What are the 5 pillars? So that's it on predictive autoimmunity. The concept is your immune system trying to protect you starts attacking your own tissue. The question is, why does that happen? We're going to get into that, but just understand that the immune system is doing that for years, attacking your thyroid, attacking your thyroid, attacking your thyroid, before you ever have a symptom. That's the takeaway that's so important here. So this concept has been talked about now for a few years. It came out in print in January by one of my mentors, Alessio Fasano at Harvard. This is his concept, and he published this paper in January of this year. And if you look at the title of the paper, now, when you are the chair of pediatric gastroenterology at Mass General at Harvard, and the director of the Mucosal Immunology Center, and the director of the Center for Celiac Research and Treatment at Harvard, you're always really careful about what you say. You have to be, because it's so easy to be misquoted, and then the press gets a hold of it. Because you're at the top of the field, it can be devastating. So you're always careful of what you say. Look what Professor Fasano said in January of this year. All disease begins in the leaky gut. Now that's coming from one of the world's premier researchers. This is the guy who identified intestinal permeability, or the leaky gut. in 1997. And his team has been researching this for the last 20 some years. We think he'll get the Nobel Prize one day for this because it's so game changing for millions and millions of people. But the title, All Disease Begins in the Gut. So you'll hear me say this a number of times. If there's only one thing you're going to do and focus on to get healthy, you rebuild your gut. You get a healthy microbiome. And we're going to talk about that today in a lot of detail. I wanted to make sure you had those takeaways. But that's the one thing everyone needs to do when they're dealing with a disease. Well, what about diabetes? All disease begins in the gut. What about Alzheimer's? All disease begins in the gut. What about rheumatoid? What drug should I take to feel better? All disease begins in the gut. There's no other way to say it. And he's come out now and taken the position, all disease begins in the gut. So there's growing evidence that the elements of gut permeability, that's the leaky gut, your immune system responding in the bloodstream to that, that's what triggers the autoimmune mechanisms, we'll talk about that, and your microbiome, along with your genetics and exposure to environmental triggers. You remember Dr. Arbuckle's article from 2003, from 17 years ago, genetics were at the top, environmental triggers at the bottom, and now we're putting all 5 of these together. This is the frame of where all chronic disease comes from. These 5 factors, your genetics, can't do anything about that, the environment, leaky gut, systemic immune response, and environmental triggers that set it all off. So this is what it's like for all of us today with this world that we're exposed to, that this guy doesn't have a chance if he doesn't have protection. There's no chance that he's going to survive. I'm taking a pretty strong stance these days and saying there's no chance that the next generation is going to survive and have a long and vital life. Many of you have heard for the first time in history now, every year for the last 4, 5, 6 years, every year, children born today have a shorter projected lifespan than their parents. They're going to die at an earlier age than their parents because a perfect storm has been created of these 5 pillars: the genetics, environmental triggers, altering your microbiome, causing leaky gut, and then the systemic immune response that happens from that. So we're going to talk a little about environmental triggers. And this study, this one dropped my jaw. This comes from the journal Pediatrics, and arguably the #1 journal for children's health care in the English language. And if you notice at the top, the title of this is a policy statement. This is not some doctor who was lucky enough to be published in this first-tier journal. I mean, you score if you get published in Pediatrics. This is not an individual opinion. This is a policy statement. It comes from the board of the American Academy of Pediatrics. And this is what they tell us. The TSCA, which was passed almost 35 years ago, failed miserably to protect children, pregnant women, and the general population, meaning all of us, from hazardous chemicals. Completely failed. The lobbyists for the chemical industry were so successful in convincing our legislators to pass this legislation that has no teeth. Absolutely no teeth. And this is still the legislation at the federal level that controls all chemicals introduced into our environment. They've made sure that this is still the regulating governance. In 30 years, it's regulated 5 chemicals or classes of chemicals, 5 out of tens of thousands. Why? Because you have to prove that the amount of chemical that the average person is exposed to is toxic to humans. That's the kicker. Because most of these chemicals in the doses that you're exposed to, such as BPA, which is a phthalate in water bottles and many other substances, The amount of BPA you get when you drink your water from a plastic bottle is not toxic to humans. The amount of BPA in the lid on your coffee cup at the coffee shop, the steam from the coffee condenses on the underside of the lid, drips back down into the coffee, full of bisphenol A. You put the coffee cup up to your lips, and the hot liquid hits the underside of the lid, tapers down into the opening, full of bisphenol A. But that amount of bisphenol A is not toxic to humans, so they say. But this stuff is accumulative in the body. I'll show you. The costs of TSCA safety testing are borne by the public. Manufacturers are not required to test. That's as ridiculous as vaccine manufacturers are not liable for the vaccines they make. I don't care if you're pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine, any company that can produce whatever they want and no one can hold them accountable, that is not right in our society. I'm not taking sides here. I'm just talking about right and wrong. But that's just not right. Without sufficient information on the safety or health effects of chemicals, the EPA cannot engage in appropriate regulation. They are not a research institute. They are a protection institute. They regulate, but they can't because they can't do the research. They don't have the funds to do the research to show the toxicity of these things. And here's the kicker. 27 trillion pounds of chemicals are produced in or imported in the United States every year. Now take that number, 27 trillion, divided by the population of the United States and divided by 365 days, and that's 247 pounds of chemicals per person per day that are imported or manufactured into the United States. 240, that's 5 50-pound bags. And this was 9 years ago. I'm sure it's gone up. I just haven't gotten more current statistics. 247 pounds per person per day, every single day, every day. That is why, sorry, my clicker is a little sensitive today. That is why the average baby is born with over 200 chemicals in their bloodstream at birth. And many of these chemicals are neurotoxins. Many of them are. Mom, excuse me, mom is a walking sewage dump. And no one wants to talk to you like this. Oh, it's not politically correct. Wake up. We're walking sewage dumps. Every newborn child's got over 200 chemicals in their bloodstream at birth because mom has all this stored in her fat cells. Every woman of childbearing age needs to do aggressive, comprehensive detoxification programs to get this crud out before they get pregnant. Don't you ever detox while you're pregnant. Before, because you don't want to mobilize more of this stuff, but before they get pregnant. We think the next generation has to save us from the craziness that we've done to our world. It's not going to happen. When you see the incidence of autism now is 1 out of 36. And when I came out in practice, it was 1 out of 10,000. Now it's 1 out of 36. Kids can't function. 1 out of 3 elders dies with dementia because the brain is the yellow canary in the coal mine. What is it that's causing all the inflammation in the brain that's killing off the brain cells faster than you can regenerate them? And this decades-long process that eventually ends up with dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's or Lewy body or autism, you know, whatever it is, what is it that's causing all that? 247 pounds of chemicals per person per day. This is a wake-up call. Now, I'm overwhelming you. I know I'm overwhelming you. I'm going to give you some advice of what to do to get started and a path to get out of this mess. That's the goal here today. Every one of these things is loaded with bisphenol A as an example on the inside. Every one of these foodstuffs has BPA, bisphenol A in it, and other chemical, many other chemicals when we consume them. So I'm picking on BPA because there's been a lot of research done on BPA. And if I put a pearl on the slide, this is a pearl, right? So bisphenol A has been getting a lot of media attention, but it's been known about for 80 years. It was a synthetic estrogen, and it was first synthesized in the 1890s, and in the 1930s it was identified as an estrogen and given for pharmaceutical use, but then they discontinued it because DES came along, and it was a stronger estrogen-like chemical and pharmaceutical. And decades later, millions of women had been prescribed DES in a misguided attempt to prevent miscarriages. That means so many pregnant women were given DES as a preventive, but then they discovered a rare form of cancer and reproductive problems in women whose mothers took it because those women's ovaries and reproductive system never developed properly in utero. Why? Because these chemicals were in the bloodstream as baby was growing and developing. I'm going to show you more about that concept with some other chemicals. These studies went on to determine that more than 90% of the DES daughters have abnormalities of the reproductive tract. And of course, DES was outlawed quite a while ago, but these women are still suffering whose mothers took DES. So I want to show you a little something about BPA here, which was replaced by DES. In this study, to better understand how a person's health might be impacted by a normal diet that includes some canned foods, the table below shows 3 days of meals and the BPA exposures that could result based on these products. They base their calculations on a 20 to 29-year-old woman weighing about 156 pounds on average in the first trimester of pregnancy. So how much BPA was baby getting exposed to? They divided the amount of BPA in micrograms by her weight to obtain the weight-adjusted exposure value. And here are the meals. So if you look at this slide, all right, this kind of makes sense. Peaches, a can of peaches, a couple of eggs, and a piece of toast. Okay, that seems healthy, a little fruit and all of that. And the lunch and the dinner, and look that over 3 days, and look at the levels of BPA per microgram, BPA per kilogram body weight. So just know the numbers right now, 1.23, 1.06, 1.94. That's how much baby is getting in the first trimester of pregnancy if mom is eating this kind of meal, which you look at it and you say, well, that's not really an ideal meal, but it's not that bad. We think it's not that bad. Well, look at the studies when exposed to these levels of micrograms per kilogram. I'm going to back up for a minute. Once again, 1.23, 1.06, 1.95 micrograms of BPA per kilogram body weight per day are going into baby in these theoretical meals. Now look at micrograms per kilogram body weight of BPA, not 1.23, but 0.0001. And you get alterations in the cells talking to each other. 0.025. Changes in breast tissue predisposes cells to hormones, being more sensitive to hormones. And you can go down the entire list and you can see the risks that baby has from this level of exposure to BPA, which is nowhere near. Well, let's see, right in the middle there at 1, long-term adverse reproductive and carcinogenic effects, just like DES. And you see those small numbers, 53, 54, 50, those are the studies for each one of those side effects. This is what we're exposing our pregnant moms to with BPA. Now, I'm going to give you an example where here in Chicago, they took 132 women in the 8th month of pregnancy, and they did urine analysis of 5 different phthalates. Phthalates are the chemicals used to mold plastic. One of them they checked was BPA. Now there's hundreds of phthalates, they just checked 5. but one of them was BPA in the 8th month of pregnancy. They categorized the results in fourths, the lowest, the next, the third, and the highest, fourth. They then followed the offspring of these pregnancies for 7 years. And when the kids turned 7 years old, they did Wechsler Intelligence Scale IQ test, the official IQ test on every one of them. What did they find? There's not much in medicine that's all or every. This was every. Every child whose mother was in the highest quartile of phthalates in urine in pregnancy compared to the children in the lowest quartile. These are your kids and your grandkids. Lowest quartile. Every child in the highest quartile, their IQ was 6.7 to 7.6 points lower than the kids in the lowest quartile of mom having phthalates in urine and pregnancy. 7 points lower. That doesn't mean anything to most people until you know that 1 point difference in IQ is noticeable. 7 point difference in IQ is a difference between a child working really hard, getting straight A's, and a child working really hard, getting straight C's. This kid, your child or your grandchild, doesn't have a chance in hell of doing well because their brain never developed properly. Just go to Google and type in phthalates, PHTHALATES, phthalates and neurogenesis, nerve growth. Here come the studies. Phthalates inhibit nerve growth. When mom has high levels of phthalates in her bloodstream, BPA and the other phthalates, this is the result. Every child whose mom had the highest accumulation of phthalates. Now there's no evidence that the amount of phthalates that leach out of a can of Campbell's tomato soup is toxic to humans. That's how they got away with this. When you learn that nail polish leaches phthalates into your bloodstream in 3 to 5 minutes. Now, there's no evidence that the amount of phthalates that leach out of nail polish in 3 to 5 minutes is toxic to humans. That's how they get away with this. When you learn that your plastic storage containers, you put leftover chicken in the storage container in the refrigerator, the next day the chicken's got phthalates in it. Now, there's no evidence that the amount of phthalates that leach out of plastic storage containers is toxic to humans. That's how they get away with this. That's how they paid off the legislators. That's what you're up against in our world today. Now take that to flame retardant chemicals on your sofa. Take that to, flame retardant chemicals on your bedroom sheets, blankets, and comforters, and your sleeping gear. This stuff outgasses these chemicals for years. You wash them 30 times. They still have minute traces that outgas of these chemicals. Now, there's no evidence that the amount of flame retardant chemicals that outgas out of sheets that have been washed 30 times is toxic to humans. That's how they get away with this. When you learn that Scotchgard, stain-resistant Scotchgard on your sofas, leach and you inhale all, now there's no evidence that the outgassing of the chemicals in Scotchgard, stain-resistant chemicals, is toxic to humans. That's how they get away with this. When you learn that formaldehyde in your kitchen cabinets, if it's not solid wood, it's pressboard, it's got formaldehyde in it. And in your bathroom cabinets, if they're not solid wood, they've got formaldehyde in them. They're pressboard, and they outgas. Now, there's no evidence that the amount of formaldehydes that outgas out of kitchen cabinets is toxic to humans. That's how they get away with this. And it accumulates in your body. Now give me a woman who's been doing her nails since she was 5 years old, 25 years later, now she's 30, healthy. Hopefully she's having a healthy pregnancy and a healthy delivery. That baby is loaded with 200 chemicals that aren't supposed to be there. Many of them that inhibit brain development, as this study shows you. That's what we're up against. That's why detoxification is a part of your life for the rest of your life. You have this much attention on it every day, not once a quarter or once a year. My wife and I go to Swiss Mountain Clinic every year. We spend 2 weeks there, and we invite people to come while we're there, and we do classes and all of that, but we go every year. Well, that's great, but that's not enough. that's not enough. You have to have a consciousness around detoxification principles on an ongoing basis. You have to learn what detoxification pathways I'm vulnerable to not working very well. And how do I enhance my detoxification pathways? You have to learn all this stuff. Because phthalates are ubiquitous, they're in the environment. Plastic blinds on your windows outgas phthalates into the air. Well, there's no phthalates in my air. Really? Really? You see the sunlight coming through the window sometimes, you know, the angle's right, and you see the dust in the air sometimes, you can see a little bit of that. You're breathing all of that. That's phthalates. That's stain-resistant Scotchgard. That's flame-resistant chemicals. That's formaldehyde. That's pesticides. That's all of that. The varnish on your wood floors, all of that are in, the studies are really clear. In most parts of the country, indoor air pollution is more toxic to the human than outdoor air pollution. Everyone needs an air filtration system in their house. Everyone does. It's just not possible with the building supplies we use today and our furniture and our clothing to not have a toxic home environment. Never run your dishwasher during the day, because those toxic detergents that you're using in your dishwasher, that's not an airtight container. It's watertight, but it's not airtight. Only run your dishwasher when no one's in the kitchen and everybody's asleep at night. That's when you run your dishwasher. You have to start thinking that way to have less exposure to these chemicals. So once again, 200 chemicals in their cord blood at birth. Yes. Oh, I guess I've got the BPA slides here twice, so I'm going right past them. Okay, let's move on now. So how are we going to protect ourselves? So I'm not going to do any more about environmental exposures. I just need to do a what? So that hopefully you'll learn more on your own about this. You know, my most recent book came out about 1.5 years ago, is You Can Fix Your Brain. And the subtitle to the book is just 1 hour a week to the best memory, productivity, and sleep you've ever had. That's not a cutesy subtitle. That is the only way to be successful, because I overwhelm you. You are going to be overwhelmed. And what happens is people feel immobilized, like a deer in the headlights. And so they throw the baby out with the bathwater and they do nothing. So 1 hour a week, you allocate 1 hour a week, maybe Tuesday night after dinner, maybe Sunday after services, whenever it is. But you tell your family every week at this time, I'm allocating 1 hour to learn more of how to create a healthier environment for us as a family. And when you learn, you go back to my book and you look at the 3 URLs for glass storage containers. And you go to mileskimball.com and you go to Amazon, and the third one, whatever it was, I don't remember. And you say, oh, those are, oh, I like those. I really like those. And you order 3 round ones and 2 square ones and 1 for the pies. You pay with your credit card, you hit send, you're done for the week. It took you an hour, but never again will you poison your family putting leftover foods in plastic storage containers. Give the Tupperware to your husband to use in the garage to store nails. It's good for that, right? But you use glass containers, and people ask, well, Doc, they've got plastic lids on them. Well, don't turn the food upside down so the food's touching the lid, right? Get glass storage containers. And you learn, 1 week you do this, 1 week you get organic nail polish, 1 week you're working on air filtration systems. You're looking at air filtration systems. 1 week you order houseplants, because houseplants suck up over 70% of the toxic fumes in the air. Get rid of them and convert and put more oxygen in the air. And every week you do one thing, boom, boom, boom. And in 6 months, you've nailed this. You've really changed the lifestyle that's caused the problems you have. You know, I just did an interview earlier today, about our current pandemic and this virus. And what do you do about this virus? And I go back to, I'm grateful to be on the faculty of the Institute for Functional Medicine. And we talked a lot in February about what is this thing? What are you guys hearing? What studies are you reading? And our mentor and founder of functional medicine, Dr. Bland, Jeff Bland, came on and he said, now, hey, everyone, please remember that this SARS-CoV-2 virus is a lifestyle disease. It's a lifestyle disease. How you lived your life determines whether you're going to have a reaction to exposure to this virus. Over 80%, 80 to 85% of the people exposed to this virus have no reaction whatsoever, and their immune system takes care of it, contains the virus, and makes antibodies to any future exposure. 80 to 85%. 10 to 15% get mild, little sore throat, little diarrhea, maybe a light fever, and then they're fine. And 5% don't. They have a more serious reaction. Why? Because how worn out is your immune system? How beat up is your body? You have degenerative diseases like diabetes and high blood pressure, and your body's weaker, you're an elder, and your body's a bit weaker. You're more at risk to not be able to respond appropriately to exposure to this virus. So what does that mean? Change the lifestyle that you've lived up to now, because it ain't working the way you want it to work. And you start doing these little things one at a time, one at a time, one at a time. When you understand that we're all toxic sewage dumps, I'm sorry to be so blunt about it, but I got to get it in. You got to understand it's not just another, oh, isn't that an interesting fact? That you go on using the same containers to store your food in, or you keep doing the same thing. You go to the coffee shop and get your coffee to go, and you leave the lid on it. I never put a lid on if I'm in a coffee shop, never. And if I have to, because they fill it up so high, I just pour a little bit out so I can walk with it and it's not going to burn my hand, spilling out over the sides. Oh my God, you throw out a little bit of the coffee. Yeah, I do. Yeah, because I'm not going to suck in more bisphenol A. You make compromises to protect yourself as best as you can. So this last section I want to talk about, and then we'll go to questions, is how do you protect yourself? Well, here's the perfect storm with the 5 pillars of the perfect storm. And the ones that you have complete control over are the middle 3. You have complete control over those. You have to learn how to have control over them, but you can't control your genes. The genes that's the deck of cards you were dealt. You have the Alzheimer's gene, it doesn't mean you're going to get Alzheimer's. Let's talk about that for a minute. You have a BRCA gene, doesn't mean you're going to get breast cancer. It means you're much more vulnerable to getting breast cancer. You're much more vulnerable to getting Alzheimer's with the ApoE4, but it doesn't mean you're going to get Alzheimer's. The question is, does that gene get turned on? And how much does it get turned on? We've all heard the term, especially this group, you've heard the term many, many times, epigenetics. What's happening around the gene? Well, what does that mean? Your genes have dimmer switches on them. It's not an on-off switch. It's a dimmer switch. And every little thing you do either turns up the dimmer switch or turns down the dimmer switch. So you turn up the dimmer switch of an ApoE4, you get more inflammation in your brain. Now you turn up the dimmer switch for LDL lipoprotein 1, you get less inflammation in your brain. So some genes you turn on that are anti-inflammatory, some genes you turn off that are inflammatory, and it's really not on and off. You turn them up or you turn them down. So you want to turn down the genes that are inflammatory, turn up the genes that are anti-inflammatory, and the way you do that is by number 2 here, the environment. That's epigenetics. What you eat, what you breathe, gets into your tissues. That's what turns the dimmer switches up or down, is the environment. And we have the most toxic environment ever known in the history of humankind. Humanity has never seen an environment like this before. Yeah, if you lived at the base of a mountain, the volcano blew off, yeah, you got a really toxic environment there. But in terms of the planet, never have we had the kind of environmental toxicity that we have now. And it keeps getting worse every year because nobody's putting enough attention on it. We need everyone to put this much attention on it and we'll see a change. but it's the environment that controls the dimmer switch. That's the epigenetics around your genes that turns a gene on for more inflammation and Alzheimer's or rheumatoid arthritis or breast cancer, or turns the genes off or low and turns the genes high for anti-inflammatory. It's your environment. And the most common source of that environment is what's on the end of your fork. That's the most common, but the air is a pretty close second now, more than ever before in history. Okay, so if there's one thing you're going to do, just one thing to get healthier, you work on your microbiome to create a healthier microbiome. Because from that, to create a healthier microbiome, you learn what environmental triggers alter your microbiome in a positive way or alter them in a negative way. So I'm going to talk about a step-by-step process of rebuilding a healthy microbiome. Okay, here we go. Now, many people are gluten-free. That's a really good thing. I'm not going to talk about it today, but you've heard before, I'm sure you've heard before, every human gets transient intestinal permeability every time they eat wheat. I've got a course for practitioners and non-practitioners called the Certified Gluten Practitioner Program. It's at certifiedglutenpractitioner.com, and it's 12 hours. You've got 3 months to complete it, and you learn all this stuff. There's 350 some studies in there. But every human gets permeability every time they eat wheat, every single human. So taking wheat out of the diet is an essential for most people. If you haven't crossed the line of tolerance yet, as I said, transient intestinal permeability means you tear the lining of the gut, but it heals. You tear the lining of the gut, but it heals. You tear the lining of the gut, but it heals until it doesn't heal anymore. That's when you've lost tolerance, called loss of oral tolerance. And almost all of us have lost oral tolerance. There are a few that haven't. They can still eat wheat, but most have. So if you have lost tolerance, then you can't eat wheat, ever, ever. 1/8 of a thumbnail of wheat exposure, after you've been gluten-free for 3 months, 1/8 of a thumbnail activates your genes. You get intestinal permeability and you get antibodies to myelin, once again, if that's your weak link, or antibodies to your thyroid, or antibodies to wherever the weak link is in your system for 2 to 3 months, from 1/8 of a thumbnail of exposure. Just read the science. When you read the science, it's like, what? And I'll talk more about that later. But I'm talking about this now because 80% of the prebiotics, those are the foods that feed the good bacteria in the gut, 80% of the prebiotics come from wheat in the average American diet. 80%. Not everything in wheat is bad for you. Wheat's not good for you, but there's some things in wheat that are beneficial and we've become dependent on them. One of them is prebiotics. They're called arabinoxylans in wheat. It's a good geek word, but doesn't matter. They're the prebiotics. Take wheat out of the diet, replace it with gluten-free food, which is just white paste. Excuse me, but it's crap. It doesn't have any fiber. It doesn't have any prebiotic, and it's white paste. It's high on the glycemic index, so your body thinks it's more sugar. So take the prebiotics, 80% of the prebiotics out of your diet that your gut bacteria have been depending on to be fed by. Take them out of there and replace it with white, starchy, high glycemic index foods, sugars. What happens to your microbiome? That's why so many people go gluten-free. They feel better for a while. They lose some weight. 6 months down the road, they're feeling pretty bad. They still have health problems going on. It's because they're damaging their microbiome. They now have dysbiosis. They have an imbalanced microbiome that was much worse than before. And it actually can be a high risk factor for many people to go gluten-free if they don't know how to do it right. It's extremely healthy to go gluten-free when you know how to do it right. It can be very dangerous to go gluten-free when you don't know how to do it right. So dangerous, in the Journal of the American Medical Association, in the largest study ever done on mortality in celiac disease, this was done in 2009, they showed that celiacs have an 86% increased risk of mortality within the first year after diagnosis compared to non-celiacs. They looked at 350,000 people who had endoscopies to see if they had, what kind of gut problems they had, and they found 29,000 celiacs. So they compared the 29,000 celiacs with the other 320,000 people that weren't celiacs. And if you were diagnosed with celiac disease, you had an 86% increased risk of dying within 1 year of a heart attack compared to these people, just by being diagnosed. Why? Well, what happens when you're diagnosed? You go gluten-free. What else do you do? Nothing. And you have an 86% increased risk of mortality in the first year. And it was a 3.8-fold, almost 400% increased risk of dying in the first year of cancer. Why? Because you wipe out the microbiome of whatever good microbiome you had. You know, you cause worse dysbiosis by going gluten-free. So when that happens, you have to replace the prebiotics that you've eliminated by going gluten-free, which is a good thing to do. But you have to replace the prebiotics. So, yeah, I'm just going to skip the science stuff here. You know, the point's the same. Oh, wait a minute. Let me go back to this study. Oh, no. Where is it? I'm missing a slide here. I'm sorry. So I'll show you this first. When the growth of beneficial bacteria is not supported due to reduced supply of the prebiotics, bad bacteria can grow. Happens quite regularly. Highly fermentable carbohydrates like prebiotics are able to counteract most of the metabolic alterations linked to obesity. And that's a good thing. You have to take prebiotics. Now in this study, I'm missing the first slide of this study, they took 10 people, healthy people, they were about 30 years old, and they checked their microbiome. They had no health complaints. They put them on a gluten-free diet for a month. Then they checked their microbiome again. The good bacteria decreased substantially. The bad bacteria increased, and the diversity of the microbiome went down. When they gave a prebiotic in a gluten-free diet, the good bacteria goes up, and the good fats, the short-chain fatty acids, went up by 31%. The short-chain fatty acids, one of them, the most common one, is called butyrate or butyric acid. Really, really important. You want to know how important it is? Just go to Google and type in butyric acid and colon cancer. And you see, when you have low butyric acid, the main short-chain fatty acid, you're at a much higher risk of colon cancer. Why? Fastest growing cells in the body, second fastest growing cells in the body, are the inside lining of the gut. The first is your nose, the lining of your nose. Second is the inside lining of your gut. Those cells reproduce every 2, 3, 4 days, depending on what study you read. The fuel for those cells to reproduce is butyric acid or butyrate, same thing. What happens if you don't have enough butyric acid, the cells are still going to reproduce, but you build your house out of straw instead of brick. What does that mean? Butyric acid and colon cancer. You reproduce bad cells because you don't have enough butyric acid. That's how important butyric acid is. How do you get butyric acid? It's the action of the good bacteria in your gut on prebiotics, on vegetable fiber. That's how you get more short-chain fatty acids or butyric acid. So this confusing slide, when taken in sections, when you eat more prebiotics from root vegetables and gluten grain. No, that's not correct, because rice has gluten, corn has gluten. So when you avoid wheat, rye, and barley, but you have some other grains, or mushrooms, or pomegranates, or grapes, and resveratrol, when you eat these foods that the good bacteria in your gut feed on, you reproduce more of the good bacteria. You don't need to know the names of those, but that's the good bacteria. The good bacteria produces exhaust. It's called metabolites. These metabolites, 1/3 of all of the small molecules in your bloodstream are these metabolites of the good bacteria in your gut. 1/3 of everything in your bloodstream are the metabolites of the probiotics in your gut. Why? Because they're the messengers that are affecting the dimmer switches of all of your genes. That's how your genes are controlled, by the messengers that are produced as the exhaust from the good bacteria. Now, in this textbook by Professor Schoenfeld, he tells us 36% of all the small molecules in the healthy human blood are from the gut microbiome. They're the exhaust of the gut microbiome, which means they're the controls that are activating your genes to calm down if they're inflammatory genes, or to turn them up if they're anti-inflammatory genes. So we go back here, all of this good bacteria now starts producing these exhausts that goes to the genes of your gut, your liver, your fat cells, your muscles, your brain, all of these different target organs, which then increases the molecular function of those organs. And the end result is lower blood sugar, lower insulin resistance, lower fat mass, better glucose tolerance, lower inflammation, lower endotoxemia, all of the things we want for a healthy anti-inflammatory environment. The takeaway here to this slide is the exhaust of the good bacteria in your gut. 1/3 of all of the molecules, the small molecules in your bloodstream, are this exhaust. They operate the dimmer switches on all of your genes that determine whether your BRCA gene gets turned on or not. The Alzheimer's gene, ApoE4, gets turned on or not, gets ringed up, turned up bright, or is it down low? This is the mechanism you have to understand. So how important does that make the microbiome of your gut? I said at the very beginning, if there's only one thing you're going to do to get healthier, you build a healthy, diverse microbiome that has impact on more of your body than anything else. And that's what we're talking about here. The first thing on that list is prebiotics. So Mrs. Patient, when you go shopping for your vegetables, I want you to buy one of every root vegetable in the store. Always get organic if you can. If you can't get organic for any reason, you go to my website, thedr.com, and go under tabs, and you go under resources, the tab for resources, scroll down to My Green Fills. Watch the interview I did with Stephen Azell, the president of My Green Fills, who has non-toxic dishwashing detergent, non-toxic Windex kind of things, non-toxic wood cleaner. And he's got this spray. You buy inorganic broccoli because you can't access organic broccoli. You spray the broccoli with this, dip it in some water, and whoa, look at that. It's got a shine to it because you've taken the wax off and you've taken the chemicals off. And the interview, he tells it's over 90% of the chemicals on inorganic vegetables is gone when you spray it and dip it in some water. So you come back from shopping, you in the kitchen sink, you put your dishwashing pan, fill it with water, take your vegetables, spray them, dip them in the water to rinse them off, then put them in the drying rack. An hour later, when they're dry, you put them in the refrigerator. That's how you minimize the complications of not having organic. But anyway, you get one or two of each root vegetable in the store. I have to pause for a minute, and I have to tell you that I'm speaking to you from Costa Rica, and we have a storm right now. You may hear the thunder in the background, which is no problem. However, we're in the jungles of Costa Rica. I'm not in a city, I'm in the jungles. And we lose power every once in a while. If we lose power, I will try to come back to you as soon as power comes on. But just if I disappear, that's why, okay? I hope it doesn't happen, but it might. I've got no control over it. So you get one of every root vegetable in the store. You get a turnip, a rutabaga, a parsnip, a carrot, sweet potatoes, radishes. Well, I don't know how to cook a turnip. Well, neither do I. I just slice an onion, peel some garlic, dice up a turnip, coconut oil in a pan or avocado oil, saute it all together till it's soft, put some sauce on it, gluten-free sauce, and I eat it. You don't have to be Julia Child here. Well, what do you do with a rutabaga? I slice an onion, dice up the rutabaga, peel some garlic, little coconut oil or avocado oil in the pan, saute it up, put a peanut sauce on it or another kind of sauce, maybe a sweet Thai chili, and I eat it. You just have to get the root vegetables down there because they are the best prebiotics. And you don't eat the same root vegetable. Yes, sweet potatoes are good for you, but they feed certain families of probiotics, the good bacteria, whereas turnips feed other families of probiotics. So you want to alter the root vegetables you're eating every day. And you've all been to restaurants, especially where you are, in the area of the country you're in, where they peel radishes really thin and curl them, and they put them on your salad plate, and you eat them and say, oh, that tastes pretty good. Eat them raw, right? So you don't have to be Julia Child to do this. Then go to Google and type in list of prebiotic foods. Print the list out, put it on your refrigerator. You're going to learn that a banana is a prebiotic, an onion's a prebiotic, garlic's a prebiotic. You don't have to eat weird stuff like chicory root, which is good for you, but you don't have to eat the weird stuff if you don't want to. And you eat one root vegetable and 2 other prebiotics every day to feed the good bacteria. So you're helping to develop a robust, good bacteria environment in your gut. This paper in 2012 caught me. It really caught me. This was a researcher, guy came from China to study, I think it was at MIT, I'm not sure, to get his PhD. And he worked really hard and he did well, but he gained a lot of weight. And he remembered that his grandmother had told him about Chinese yams and bitter melon. So he started eating Chinese yams and bitter melon every day. He didn't do anything else. He didn't count calories. He didn't start exercising. He just ate Chinese yams and bitter melon every day. And when he combined these with a diet based on whole grains, he lost 42 pounds in 2 years. His blood pressure went down, his heart rate went down, his cholesterol went down. A really good bacteria called fecal bacterium, which was non-existent when he started, was 14.5% of his entire gut microbiome within 2 years. And just by changing the prebiotics he was eating and eating a whole grain diet. So eat the root vegetables. Every day have some root vegetables. Look at this. You wouldn't think it's the same guy. Just by controlling his prebiotics to build a healthier microbiome. Provision of gluten-free but prebiotic-rich foods and or a supplement of prebiotics could provide an important support to your intestinal microbiota. So, Mrs. Patient, for 2 months, I want you to take a supplement. While you're going through this transition, I want you to take a supplement of prebiotic. Now, my wife and I take it every day. I'm not asking you to, but for 2 months, you take this because we're changing your microbiome. I don't want you to roller coaster. I want you to just go up to a higher anti-inflammatory microbiome. So take this for a couple of months, along with changing your food selections. Next, rebuilding a healthier protective mucus layer in your gut. Really important for that. And in order to do that, Mrs. Patient, I want you to have 1 cup per day of bone broth. You know, my kids bought me a Cuisinart grill that sits on the countertop, and I put a chicken on a spike and a little drip pan underneath. You put it in there, close the door, push a button, and it rotates, and the coils are on the side cooking it, right? Really simple. And the drip pan collects all the good fat, right? So I keep all that juice, and I put some root vegetables in there while it's cooking. And then when we're done with the chicken, we save all the bones and the skin. We throw it in a pot with some water. I take a couple sheets of nori, seaweed. I just cut it up into little strips, throw it in there, and you just boil it. I boil it for about an hour, then I throw a bunch of old vegetables in there, cuttings and all that. And I just cook it for about 4 or 6 hours. Then I strain it. There's your bone broth. Easy to do. It's a no-brainer. You get a whole fish, you save the fish bones and the skin, and you throw them in and you make fish bone broth. Bone broth is really good for you. Why? Because it's a source of gelatin tannate. Gelatin tannate is like a seal for your leaky gut. When you've got damage to your gut that looks like this, and a bunch of crud can come from up top where the lumen is, a bunch of molecules can get through the leaky gut into the bloodstream and cause all kinds of inflammation. The gelatin tannate acts like a seal so that it gives it a chance to heal. It's not as inflamed. And that mucus lining below the blue of the gelatin tannate, that's where the mucus lining is. It's been all beat up. That's why you're taking mega mucosa, is to heal that. But the tannate acts like a Band-Aid or a seal for the cells to heal. That's why you take a cup of bone broth every day. Next, Mrs. Patient. Oh, we already did the mega mucosa. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Yeah, there we go. 1 tablespoon of fermented vegetables every day. 1 tablespoon a day. And I want you to get 5 different types of fermented vegetables. You get kimchi, you get sauerkraut, you get miso, you get fermented beets, you get curry flavored, whatever you like, but 1 tablespoon per day. Why? Because the fermentation of the vegetables, just make sure they're not pasteurized, the fermentation of the vegetables produces different families of bacteria. And so you're inoculating with good bacteria when you eat fermented vegetables. Consumption of fermented foods would not only provide important macronutrients, meaning vitamins A, B, C, D, they could also deliver large amounts of beneficial microorganisms to the GI tract. You're inoculating with the good bacteria when you're eating fermented foods. The ingestion of fermented foods potentially increases the numbers of microbes 10,000-fold. Not 2 times, not 3 times, not 50 times more, 10,000 times more. When you have a tablespoon, I don't like it. I don't care if you like it. You don't have to like it. Hide it in the mashed potatoes. Hide it in the soup. You don't have to taste it. You just got to get it down there. Most important. And this is a great book that came out last year by Suzanne Bennett. She'd be great for you to have as a speaker. She's in the LA area. Suzanne's a good friend, and I actually wrote the foreword to the book. I was so impressed with this book, and this is a little what I said in the foreword to the book. These bacteria sound like something out of a Star Wars movie or a Klingon community, with names like Akkermansia, Alobaculum, Eubacterium, Clostridium, Klebsiella. You don't know whether to feed them or shoot them. And are they saying we come in peace, or have they come to conquer, right? But you grab a light switch and you have to pull it up or down to turn the light on or off. These microbial genes create the pull on the switch of your human genes. That's that dimmer I was talking to you about. Actually, it's more of a dimmer. Switch them than an on-off switch. That's why you can slowly reverse diseases, dim down the Alzheimer's gene, stop the inflammation in your brain, or the autism genes. So who's more dominant here? Who's making more noise being heard? The small molecules in the bloodstream coming from the bad bacteria, or the small molecules in the bloodstream coming from the good bacteria that go to your brain, to your heart, to your liver, to your kidneys, to your lungs. They're all modulated by the microbiome. And that's a geek word, modulate. What it means is has its hands on the steering wheel. That's the microbiome that's controlling where your health is going in life. That's why it's the #1 thing that you work on. Who's creating the message, the movie of your day-to-day life, working the dimmer switches here in the command center of your human genes? It's the microbial epigenome that surrounds the human genes. We know that. It's all of the construction crew building the movie set, the switchboard operators, the secretaries, the lighting people, the sound people, the camera operators, the runners, the maintenance people, the Akkermansia, the Allobaculum, the Lactobacillus, the Eubacterium, the Bifidobacterium, the Clostridium, the Klebsiella, and 1,000 more species that make up the diversity of your microbiome. They're the ones who determine which genes get turned on and which genes get turned off. They create the picture, the movie that's playing in your cells. And I put Suzanne's book here because it's so simple to make kimchi. You've got it in 3 days. It takes you about 15 minutes, and in 3 days, you got kimchi. That's how easy it is. Once you've got it down, you'll blow it once or twice, 1 hour a week, 1 week. Okay, what's the list of what I need? And then you go shopping for that. The next week, your 1 hour is making kimchi. And then it takes you 3-4 days to see how it came out. Okay, let's move on. Yep, we know that. To accelerate the rebuilding program, Mrs. Patient, for a couple of months, I want you to take a probiotic supplement. The probiotic supplements, now you're inoculating with the good bacteria of fermented vegetables, but we don't want you to roll up and down with this. I want you to just keep going up in a healthier, stronger microbiome. My wife and I take this every day. We really like the spores. The spore type of probiotics seem to have a more powerful impact, a more comprehensive impact to build the diversity of the microbiome. That's why I'm using spores and recommending them to people now. And the key findings are that spores help to correct the leaky gut. The spore-based probiotics do that. Next, Mrs. Patient, the function of your gut. They're arguably the most important enzyme in your gut is called intestinal alkaline phosphatase, IAP. This is really an important one because IAP helps to detoxify the bad bacteria that gets in. You guys know about sepsis, especially in seniors. It's over a third. I'm trying to remember the exact number. I don't remember the exact number of all deaths of elderly in a hospital comes from sepsis. And it's just the accumulation of LPS over decades. IAP reduces LPS, reduces systemic inflammation, protects the gut barrier, enhances the good bacteria. We'll skip that one. I'll go to this one. You've got bad bacteria that shouldn't get into to your gut. IAP grabs it and escorts it out in the stool. It does not go down. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this means the LPS, the bad bacteria, is not getting down to touch the lining of the intestines. It's being escorted out in the stool. But if you don't have enough IAP, then the LPS goes right down against the lining of the intestines. It gets right through into the bloodstream. There are only 2 substances that cause transient intestinal permeability, according to Professor Fasano. The 2 main substances are gluten and LPS. Those are the big boys. And IAP grabs LPS and escorts it out of the stool. Why am I telling you this? Oh, one more thing. When you have adequate amounts of IAP, intestinal alkaline phosphatase, you reduce the toxicity of LPS 100-fold. Not 10 times, not 30 times, not 50 times, 100 times. Pectin from apples significantly increases IAP. Pectin from apples reduces all of these inflammatory markers, gives a 29% reduction in blood levels of cholesterol, 72% reduction in activation of LPS getting into the bloodstream. Pectin modulates, creates more good bacteria in your gut, gets rid of endotoxemia, reduces inflammation. And how do you do it? It's with apples. You eat apples. Now, organic apples have 34 to 54% more of the compounds in them that increase IAP. So organic apples. And if you can't get organic apples, make sure you're using the spray that I told you about, because apples are number 3 on the dirty dozen of the environmental working group. Every year, they're somewhere in the top 5 of the dirty dozen of fruits and vegetables that have the most chemicals, toxic chemicals in them. Okay, we'll skip that. Well, apples, IAP increases butyrate levels. And butyrate levels, as I've already told you, help to create stronger cells when you're rebuilding the lining of your intestines. And by the way, it also builds a stronger blood-brain barrier. Butyrate is necessary in your bloodstream to rebuild a healthy blood-brain barrier that's been damaged, leaky brain. We're not going to talk about that today, but that's in the book. You can fix your brain. So, Mrs. Patient, I want you to eat a tablespoon every day, or more if you want, of homemade applesauce, not store-bought applesauce. You take 4 or 5 apples or more, you wash them, don't peel them, wash them, slice them up, dice them into spoon-sized, little diced pieces, get rid of the core, put them in a pot, add water to about 1/3 the height of the apples, add some cinnamon, maybe a couple of raisins if you want, turn it on high. 10 to 12 minutes later, look in the pot. When you see a shine on the skin of the apples, it's done. That's the pectin that's been released from the apple, so it'll be easily available in the first part of the small intestine where you really want the pectin to increase intestinal alkaline phosphatase. And every day you have a tablespoon or 2 of homemade applesauce. And when you make it, it lasts 4 or 5 days, no problem, so that you can make it with your kids or your grandkids, and then they'll look forward to eating it because they made it with you, that kind of thing. Eating outside the home is not safe. So when you go gluten-free, and I've talked a little about why you want to do that, here's something else you have to consider, because I talked about the inadvertent exposures to gluten. This paper came out in March of 2019, the American Journal of Gastroenterology. This is from Peter Green and Ben Liebowel, or Benjamin Lerner at Columbia, the very famous gastroenterologist. And they had 804 people take testing equipment into restaurants. And they ordered 5,624 different foods off of gluten-free menus. When the waiter or waitress walked away, they opened up their briefcase, took out the testing equipment, put it on the table. When the waiter or waitress came back with the food, they took a piece of the food, immediately tested it. What did they find? 32% of everything on a gluten-free menu is not gluten-free. 32%. Breakfast, 27%, dinners, 34%. Gluten-free pizza, 53% of the time, it's got gluten in it. Gluten-free pasta, 51% of the time. Inadvertent exposures to gluten, you're getting it all the time, and it only takes 1/8 of a thumbnail. And I told you, 2 months of antibodies, the whole inflammatory cascade gets turned on from 1/8 of a thumbnail if you activate the sentry standing guard in the first part of the small intestine. They're called toll-like receptor 4. It's not safe to eat outside the home, but I'm going to eat outside the home. My wife and I love gluten-free pizza. We live in northern Italy, and there's a nice little family restaurant about 3 or 4 miles away that we go to once every 10 days to 2 weeks because I love their pizza. I love their gluten-free pizza and their gluten-free pasta. I'll have gluten-free pasta maybe once every 2 weeks or so. Gluten-free pizza maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks, and I know the risks. So what do? I need protection. I take enzymes. Now, effective digestive enzymes to break down wheat have to accomplish all of these different things. There are many enzymes out there on the market to digest gluten. There are many, but almost all of them take 3 to 6 hours to work as they're going through your digestive tract. Well, the food comes out of the stomach within about 2 hours. So that means the poorly digested wheat, the inadvertent exposure to wheat, in your stomach, it comes out in the first part of the intestines where the sentries are standing guard, called toll-like receptor 4. The sentries are standing guard and they see this wheat that's coming in, they get activated and they fire their chemical bullets that causes the transient intestinal permeability in everyone. And you're off to the races with systemic inflammation. So you've got to break this stuff down before it comes out of the stomach. And in order to do that, I worked with 2 scientists 10 years ago, and I put these enzymes together. We've got tens of thousands of people that use these enzymes now. It's called E3 Advanced Plus, and they really work. And in E3 Advanced Plus, there's also a prebiotic that comes from almonds, which helps to increase the probiotics. You see here, within 5 hours of this probiotic from the enzyme called Pre4 Pro, you increase the bacterial count, the diversity, and the amount of bacteria tremendously. And they work within 60 minutes. That's the key. And it'll work, 1 capsule will work on a slice of whole wheat bread, but don't eat the bread thinking, well, I'll just take the capsule and I'm fine, because that doesn't work. We know that doesn't work. There are other reasons that we're not going to talk about today, but it doesn't work. But any inadvertent exposures to wheat from gluten-free pizza or any of the foods on a gluten-free menu, you take an E3 Advanced Plus and it works not only on wheat, but the top 8 allergens. And all of these allergens, 99% digestion within 90 minutes for all of these allergens. With wheat, it's 60 minutes, but for some reason, fish takes longer. I don't know why, but it does. So this is E3 Advanced Plus, and it's on my website at thedr.com. You can get it there, E3 Advanced Plus. And my wife and I, she keeps them in her purse. I've got some in the glove box of the car. I don't here in the jungles of Costa Rica, but I usually do. And, you know, if you go to a restaurant, if I'm having a luncheon meeting or something, and I order, I say, oh, I forgot it in the car. Oh, next time. No, get up, walk out to the car and get the enzymes. And I'll go get them and I take them, you know, I bring them back in with some water and I take them and I'm fine. And I'll read this to you because it really tells a story about E3. Dr. Tom, thank you for changing my life. I survived the worst case of lupus UCLA Medical Center has seen in 20 years. I had antiphospholipid syndrome as well as a slew of other conditions stemming from high doses of prednisone, 2 different types of chemotherapy for a year and a half, and a variety of meds used to treat the disease. She died on the table at UCLA twice. She was a model, a 5'10" model, who after 2.5 years, she was 5'4", because she had such severe osteoporosis, the bones in her back broke. I'm actually one of the only survivors of a case of lupus this aggressive and severe. In my journey to heal and reverse all the damage done to my body from the diseases and drugs, hidden exposures cause setbacks time and again. But now I no longer have these setbacks if I'm exposed to hidden sources of gluten, soy, dairy, or corn. The best part is I no longer experience 2 weeks of exposure symptoms and a 4 to 6 month balancing act. Remember I said 2 months? Well, when you're really sick, it can last longer, like for her, of detoxing my system and balancing my immune system after an assault. I'm actually seeing a much more rapid immune system rebuilding progress. And I know that the secret to making all the protocols you recommend actually work is because I'm protected now. I know that I can now travel, have a social life, still stay on my path to rebuild my immune system. Thank you for creating E3 Advanced Plus. So that was a very cool letter to get and to see her turn around from where she was. I think I'm going to stop there. I think that's enough for now. I was going to talk more about wheat and the dangers of wheat, but there's no need to do that. And let's just pause here and let's go to questions.
We have a question from Carol. Would you comment on the effects of the toll-like receptor 4 gene polymorphisms, especially, she says, heavily heterozygous?
The best I know, Carol, those are modulated by your microbiome, that the inflammatory state of the microbiome. I have no idea how to target and calm down toll-like receptor 4. My clinical opinion, I'm not a researcher on this, my clinical opinion is that toll-like receptor 4 gets activated because it's trying to protect you. Toll-like receptor 4 is the sentry standing guard in the first part of the small intestine. The reason we have this sentry standing there is because our bodies are the exact same body as our ancestor thousands of years ago. Completely the same body. What did our ancestors need protection from? Bugs, parasites, viruses, mold, fungus, and bacteria. That was it. So our ancestor would find some food, they were foraging to find food. First they smell it, then they taste it, and then they eat it. If there's a bug in there that they couldn't smell, it didn't have that high a concentration, but if that bug was not killed by the hydrochloric acid in the stomach, which it should be, but if it's not, the backup system is toll-like receptor 4 in the first part of the small intestine gets activated to create the inflammation to kill the bug. Now the problem, and maybe I'll share a screen for a minute and go right to that. I think the slide is right coming up right where I stopped. Let me see if the slide's here. Oh, no, it's not, it's not. Professor Fasano's paper, he tells us that the body misinterprets gluten as a bacteria. So gluten activates toll-like receptor 4, which means your immune system gets activated thinking every time you eat wheat, you've just gotten more exposure to a bug that activates toll-like receptor 4. So I think that I'm not familiar with anyone clinically. This is not my area of expertise I'm known for, so I don't get referrals for people that are heterozygous for toll-like receptor 4 activity. But my clinical experience is their inflammation calms down when you first get wheat completely out of their diet, protect them with gluten digesting enzymes from inadvertent exposure, and you identify any toxic bacteria in the gut, and you do that antibacterial protocol for the gut. My experience is that the inflammation in the gut calms down from that.
Monica asks, can you name the brand of the spray that you wash your food with?
Yeah, it's My Green Fills. And if you go to thedoctor.com, thedr.com, under resources and scroll down, these are all companies that I recommend, like air filtration systems and things like that. My Green Fills is down there, and you'll see the interview I did with Stephen Azell. I think the interview's there. If not, it's on Facebook. I did it about 8 weeks ago, Facebook for thedoctor.com, and you can find his products.
Sheridan, you're ready for asking your question?
Yes. Hi, Dr. Tom. I was wondering if you could comment on post-colonoscopy rebuilding of the gut. So if you have to have a colonoscopy, are there ways to actually enhance your microbiome because you've been sort of cleaned out? Do you use a specific diet? Would you maybe use an elemental diet for a period of time if you have gut issues to begin with? And are there certain products that you like to use post-colonoscopy?
Thank you. Yeah, the 50 slides I just went through on rebuilding a healthy microbiome is what I would do.
Sydney?
Yes. Hi, Dr. Tom. Thank you very much for coming here. I've read some of your stuff and I just love what you do. And I bought on one of your other programs, you mentioned colostrum. So I went to your site and bought your colostrum and I've been using that. I'm recovering from SIBO. But another woman on another site mentioned something called immunoglobulin concentrate. What is that? Is that similar to what's in colostrum?
Colostrum contains immunoglobulins. And immunoglobulin concentrate is higher concentrations of immunoglobulins. Colostrum is Mother Nature's way of healing leaky gut. Every newborn infant has a severe leaky gut. It's normal in newborns because baby is swimming in this soup that there's no boundaries for baby. And when baby comes out, the first milk for the first 3-4 days is colostrum. The messages coming from colostrum include, okay, gut, let's close those tight junctions now. Come on, let's get them tight because food's coming soon and mom's food's coming first. Here's the blueprint of that food. So let's get the enzymes starting to get produced for mom's food, but pretty soon, you know, there's other foods coming down here. So let's close the leaky gut. Imagine a newborn that's given cow's milk or soy milk to start life off with from day one for one reason or another. It's sometimes unnecessary, sometimes it's necessary. It's unfortunate, but these macromolecules, every newborn baby is severely inflamed, right? And I'm sorry, not inflamed, severely permeable, and which causes the inflammation in these babies. So colostrum is Mother Nature's way of dealing with intestinal permeability. Immunoglobulins are not known, as far as I know, for intestinal permeability, but rather to enhance immune system function. And they're good for that. There's a number of different immunoglobulin products out there for that. My problem with that is that most of the immunoglobulin products out there, the way they're harvested is that they hang cattle upside down and slice their throats while they're still alive to collect the live blood. And that's where they get the immunoglobulins from, but all the stress hormones that go through that, I've never recommended immunoglobulins because of that. But there is an immunoglobulin product from these same people that make the colostrum. This colostrum is the best in the world. There are 3 countries in Africa that license this colostrum as the treatment of choice for HIV. The first thing to do that the government pays for is this colostrum because it heals the gut. And they have come out with a new product that is the same colostrum, but with higher levels of immunoglobulins that are harvested more humanely. I don't have any experience with that product yet, it just came out, but I think it's going to be a more powerful product for people who are immune compromised, such as autoimmune diseases.
Thank you. And then just one clarification on your E3. Were you recommending it as a general enzyme, or were you recommending it particularly if you were going to have gluten or something like that?
Oh, it's a protective enzyme. It's not a general enzyme with hydrochloric acid and pancreatic enzymes and bile, fat digesting enzymes. It's not a general digestive enzyme. Okay. It is specific to protect you. Anytime you are eating outside your own cooking, or if you're using any commercial sauces, you always take an E3 before you start eating.
I see.
And you take it at the beginning of the meal before you start, so it's at the bottom of this whole glob of food, and nothing gets through into the small intestine that hasn't gone past the E3. Regular digestive enzymes, which you still may need to take if you have a deficiency of hydrochloric acid or pancreatic enzymes, regular digestive enzymes you take in the middle of a meal. So they're inside the middle of that glob of food, digesting from the inside out, and your own enzymes, whatever you're able to make, is digesting from the outside in.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
You bet.
We also have a question about the E3 regarding the presence of almond, and is there an alternative for somebody with a nut allergy?
It's a really good question. And it's not the protein of almonds, it's the lipids. And allergies are to proteins. And I've had a number of patients over the years that have nut sensitivities. Not one has had a problem. I've had a nut sensitivity reaction. Stephen,
Okay, go ahead.
Stephen, I was just going to ask if you are coordinating the questions.
Well, I'm handling the questions that are coming up in the chat and relaying them to you, or if somebody raises their hand, I'm allowing them to ask you the question directly. So if there's no hand raised, I'm looking for other questions.
Okay, so I'll go to the chat and see here. There's a question, do you have professional discount for your products on your website? Not on the website. If you are a healthcare practitioner, we do have that consideration for our certified gluten practitioners, but not for general practitioners. Question, do you drink filtered water? Whenever I can. We're here in Costa Rica now and in a home that we're renting. And I ordered and I bought a advanced water filter for here. You know, if I was here for a week or two, I wouldn't be able to. And I usually travel a lot. My life's changed completely like everyone else's this year. And, but when I travel, I do bottled water knowing I'm getting bisphenol A.
You spoke of TTG2 antibodies only going high in long-standing celiac. Could you comment further and or point somebody to a reference?
I didn't reference transglutaminase 2 antibodies in this talk, but transglutaminase 2 antibodies are elevated years before someone's diagnosed with celiac disease. In the predictive autoimmunity section, I showed that it's 50 to 60% of people with elevated transglutaminase antibodies will develop celiac, and it's 100% if they also carry the gene within 7 years. But elevated transglutaminase antibodies are from many, many different triggers, not just celiac disease. But if you have the elevated antibodies and you have the gene, and the elevated antibodies continue, you will get celiac within 7 years. And the references were Professor Schoenfeld at the bottom of that slide.
Yeah, that was in, I think, a previous talk that you gave somewhere else, where you talked about the TTG2.
Yeah, a TTG2 is not elevated only in end-stage celiac. No, that's the problem, is that TTG2 is only, how do I say this? Yeah, it's only elevated at diagnostic sensitivity and specificity at end-stage celiac disease. If you have stage 2 celiac disease, so it doesn't qualify celiac because you still have villi and they're not totally worn down yet, transglutaminase 2 is only elevated 27 to 32% of the time. That most of the time it's not elevated until you get to end-stage celiac disease, then it's elevated 97% of the time. So if you have elevated transglutaminase 2, it suggests you might have celiac disease, but there are many other triggers also. But it's only used as a consistently accurate indicator for celiac disease when you're at the end stage of celiac. And there are many, many studies. There are many studies on that. Just look for transglutaminase and celiac. Look at seronegative celiac disease.
I think this may be getting to the end of it. What are your thoughts on saunas, infrared saunas and other saunas to get rid of toxins and maybe get other health benefits?
Oh, tremendous benefits. One of the coffees I did 12 or 14 coffees with Dr. Tom. They were 8 in a row every day at the beginning of this current crisis that we have. And then I did them once a week after that. And one of them was on the benefit of saunas. Finland has the same population as Norway, 5.3 and 5.4 million people, but the Finns had only 1/6 or 1/8 the number of cases of SARS-CoV-2, and the same 1/6 to 1/8 the number of fatalities, which was ridiculously low compared to compared to Denmark, same population or very similar population. Why? 5.3 million people in Finland with 3.2 million saunas in Finland. It's part of their culture. They're in the sauna 2 to 3 times a week. And then they go into a cold bath, or a cold stream, the Wim Hof concept of being exposed to cold. So their immune systems are just as strong as can be. I think saunas are an excellent tool to use for long-term health and for detoxing. I think they're a great detox tool. I've used them for years.
In terms of probiotics and prebiotics, if somebody has an existing gut imbalance with some kind of pathogenic strain on board, is that enough just to compete against it, or do you have to kill it first?
It's a really good question. We never, if we're working with someone, we always are doing the antibacterial approach while we're doing the probiotic approach. There's no harm. If you're going to cause any distress to your system doing the prebiotics and probiotics, you'll get bloating and gas and cramping. You'll know pretty quickly. There's no danger. You just have to do the antibacterial protocol first in that case.
Susan, do you see a question that I've missed?
Your assistant mentioned there's something you might want to mention today, so I will leave that up to you.
Oh, thank you. Right, I never know what those are.
I sent you a private message on that so you can read it.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
Well, it's like we're like 9 minutes early, so it's a perfect time for an end of talk message.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's see what we've got here today. Oh, it's recipes. Okay, yeah. We have so many different things, you know, that, and for you folks, there's a couple things. I think some of you anyway know about betrayal. I traveled the world with my wife and we interviewed 86 different experts, the godfathers in autoimmunity, the very best. The world leaders, Professor Schoenfeld, who I've referenced, 28 of the PhD students who received their PhDs from him in immunology, there are many more, but 28 of them chair departments of immunology in med schools and hospitals around the world. They're his students. He's the godfather of autoimmunity. And we interviewed him a couple of times, once on vaccines and autoimmunity, because his new book had just come out. Professor Michael Marsh at Oxford, the godfather of celiac disease. When you do an endoscopy, the report is Marsh 1, Marsh 2, Marsh 3. This is Marsh. So we interviewed these experts. And then I interviewed clinicians all over the world who were functional medicine, integrative medicine, complementary medicine physicians, using the principles of these experts. And then we interviewed their patients who reversed their rheumatoid, reverse their MS, reverse their chronic fatigue, again and again and again. And we put it together in a docuseries. It's called Betrayal, the autoimmune disease solution they're not telling you. And we've had over 600,000 people watch it. And you know, we get thank you emails every day for this. It's free. It's free. It's at thedoctor.com, thedr.com/betrayal. And if you haven't seen it yet, it's really worth spending a little time. You know, there's so many summits out there these days and so many things, but it's a 9-episode series, but you know, you just watch a few minutes of the first episode. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. But it changes a lot of lives, you know. I'll never forget the 44-year-old woman in London who said, you know, I took the tube to come here today for this interview. And that's the underground train. And she said, and I walked the 7 blocks from the station here to the hotel. And she said, it's not a big deal. And then she paused and she got all teary-eyed and said, but it is. And then we show you the pictures of her in a wheelchair 2 years earlier. She can't walk. Her MS is so bad and she's got 7 lesions on her brain. And then we show you back to her today and there's 2 lesions left on her brain and she's got no symptoms. And we show you that again and again and again. And the emphasis is what I've talked about here today about this environmental world of toxins. There's no one thing you do that's going to fix everything. You have to go one thing at a time, one thing at a time. Base hits win the ball game, and you allocate 1 hour a week to this, and you will turn around whatever degenerative disease you've got. But there's no magic pill to this, but it's very empowering. And that's betrayal. And as a part of that, and as a part of the book, The Autoimmune Fix, we put together a summary of the recipes from betrayal and from my book, The Autoimmune Fix. And we've got those recipes available for you today. If you go to thedoctor.com, /get recipes, they're there for you to download. And hopefully you'll find 1 or 2 that you really like. I love the tiger milk cookies. There are many more, but that's one that just came to my mind. So with that, I will say thank you all so very much for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Well, you've also had several comments from people thanking you for both betrayal and for your talk today.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
Susan.
Well, I wish you all Godspeed. You know, there's so much information out there and we're always doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Well, and you do this for a week, but you don't feel great yet. So you stop and you do something else. You know, it's hard to get the big picture overview. It really is difficult. I understand that, but hopefully there's some pearls in here today, and focus on your microbiome. Eat your applesauce and fermented vegetables and root vegetables. Develop that lifestyle. And if you need help, I have an entire clinical services team that's extremely highly trained to work with you if you wish. You'll see that at thedoctor.com also. So with all of that, folks, thank you all so very much.
Thank you. And I want to tell everybody next week at the same time on Wednesday, my college roommate, Stephanie Seneff, will be here with us.
Oh, excellent speaker.
Yes, she is. I agree. Stephanie's great. Please tell her I send my love.
Okay, we were college roommates.
That's marvelous. Well, that validates that you're a nutcase also.
Well, I hope so.
Exactly right. It takes a lot of courage to do what Stephanie does. It takes a lot of courage. Thank you again, everyone.
Well,
Bye-bye.
thank you.
Bye-bye.